Known for a long time, has been very involved in the game industry. With this casual games GDC, we were joking around about plugging the roundtables we do at GDC every year. So I'll refrain from doing that. But Wade is going to talk today about how to make a living making games and kind of cover a bit about the 12 years, I believe, that Large Animal has been around and kind of the different models that they've used, the different ways that they've been able to be successful. I'm really looking forward to the talk, and I guess we'll let Wade take things from here.
For all the people standing in the back, there's a couple open seats up here in the front. Okay, so my name's Wade TINNEY. Thanks, Brian, for the intro. I'm the CEO of Large Animal Games. We're an independent developer based in New York City. I also run the New York City chapter of the IGDA, so I'm particularly happy to be here at the summit today. So my business partner, Josh Welber, and I founded Large Animal back in January of 2001. We were both laid off from the .com we had been working at. And I wanted to talk today just about how we've managed to make a living doing what we love, making games, and some of the many lessons we've learned along the way and continue to learn. So Large Animal went through a lot of the same evolutionary stages that I see lots of developers going through. And when we started out, we really believed that if you build a fun game, that players will find it, they'll give you some of their money, and you'll be able to use that to make a bigger, better game the next time around. Sometimes that does happen for some developers, and I'm sure we can all think of a few examples. But I believe that those are the exception to the rule, and that there's a lot more that goes into a successful game. So we gradually realized that while making a fun game is critical, it's not enough. Hundreds of fun games are released every month. Most of them don't get played by any significant number of players, and lots of them, in some cases they get played by lots and lots of players, but somehow no real money makes it back into the hands of that developer. So over our past 12 years, we've worked with, I think, just about every business model for online games. We're a self-funded company, which is important to note. We've never raised money from investors, and so we've had to be profitable from day one. Even when it was just, at that time, Josh and I working out of a spare room in his apartment in New York. So barring investment or loans, the shortest path to cash for a game developer is work for hire. And so that's how we built the company. Back in the day, large media companies would hire us to build games for them. They would put out a request for proposals to a bunch of different developers, and we would spend lots and lots of time responding to those requests for proposal, sometimes 40, 60, 80 hours worth of time creating a very detailed proposal. And if they chose our proposal, they would pay us a fixed amount of money and in order to build the game that we described in that proposal. So anyone who's done work for hire knows that those type of projects pretty much suck. It's very hard to make money doing them. They don't scale, and ultimately, for me, they're a treadmill that developers should get off of as soon as possible. They often produce very crappy games, and it's pretty easy to see why. There's this natural tension in a work-for-hire relationship where, on the one hand, the developer is incentivized to do exactly what was described in that proposal and just as much as will please the client. And if they do that, they'll make whatever margin they manage to build into their development budget. The client's motivation, on the other hand, is to make a great game. And whatever that may be. And the problem is that in most cases, the client actually has no idea what that means. And so it's a painful road. Now, work-for-hire projects are actually not completely without merit, and in some cases, I would actually recommend them to developers. The cash is one thing that recommends them. For us, as a new developer starting out 12 years ago, they proved to be a great way for us to hone our craft, working together as a team to refine our process, and to build a deep and often extremely painful understanding of deadlines. Back in the day, we worked very long hours, and we were learning as we burnt that midnight oil. Work for hire projects also helped us get really good at working with partners, and that has put us in good stead working with publishers and other types of partners. It helped us get good at negotiating deals and understand the process of shepherding someone else's IP. So when it came time to create our own IP, we had some framework for doing that. And eventually we also figured out that we could structure these work for hire deals in a way that allowed us to own our own technology and preserve the right to use that technology so that we could then bring it to the table as additional value for subsequent deals that we did. So that helped us understand technology licensing, which is now an important part of our overall business. So even as we were building games for other people, we were creating assets that added value to our business and outlasted those deals. We learned another important lesson throughout this work for hire phase of our company, which is that the most expensive part of game development is original game design. So I think that that's maybe non-intuitive for people. Obviously, game designers are not the most expensive position on your payroll, but all the other roles on the team depend on the game design. And good original game design takes lots of iteration. I'm sure you'd all agree, you almost never get it right the first time. So this is one reason you see so much cloning and derivation in the game industry. All of those people, and that cloning and derivation is a direct result of people cleverly removing the biggest piece of risk in their project, which is original game design. So for the first few years we were in business, we built dozens of Flash and Shockwave games as work for hire projects. We were working for people like Mattel and Lego, Adult Swim. We built lots of games for lots of people. And in between those projects, we scrimped and saved and worked on some original games. So the first of those original games were single-player web games, and they used an advertising-supported model. So what this meant back in 2002 is that we would take those games, we would put them on various web portals, and hundreds of thousands of people would come and play them each month. The games all had a banner ad above them. And at the end of each quarter, we would receive a check in the mail from those portals for approximately $47. And we would go splurge on Taco Bell. So this $47 problem was not unique to us or even unique to the game industry. At that time, in the early aughts, pretty much everyone on the internet had stopped making money from advertising. So when someone at Microsoft decided to try taking one of the most popular web games, which was made by a small company here in Seattle called PopCap, and wrapping it as a downloadable, a PC downloadable, and putting the common infomercial price of $19.99 on it, and it actually worked. It actually sold and started making money. Everyone in the online game space kind of breathed a sigh of relief because it was like, okay, now you have something to turn to from ads, which were completely failing. So we, Large Animal, spent the next 5 years working on single-player PC games for a casual audience, and all these games were sold in the try before you buy model. So players could play them they downloaded them for free from portals, they could play them for 60 minutes, and then at that 60-minute mark, they had to decide, do they want to keep playing and spend the $19.99, or do they want to move on to the next game? We learned a ton of new stuff during this period. The first was that good business partnerships are really, really important. Sounds obvious to say, but I think early on we suffered from what a lot of new developers suffer from, which is a kind of DIY mentality that creates a reluctance to partner. Partnerships are the best way to magnify the value of your own time and to create scale. So it was around this time that we kind of got over that do-it-yourself mentality and really started to go out and partner aggressively. So we did distribution deals with a bunch of portals. We licensed some of our IP to developers who were experts on platforms that we were not. And we learned that if you're going to make a game for someone else, it's much more fun to work on if you get a piece of the revenue if that game makes money. So we were partnering in that way and kind of evolving away from the straight work-for-hire model. The other lesson we learned, sadly, is that most games don't make much money. So those revenue shares that we fought tooth and nail to get into those agreements often did not actually produce much revenue for us. But at least we were emotionally invested, and that certainly makes the day go by faster. We also learned that when new markets emerge within the game industry, and I would venture to say within lots of industries, they rarely evolve in a way that is good for game developers or good for kind of the lowest man on the value chain, which in this case is game developers. So in the case of the downloadable game space, the percentage of revenue that was being paid out by portals to game developers was getting smaller and smaller over the course of the evolution of that downloadable game space. The price of games was also getting smaller and smaller. So started out at $19.99, and now I don't even know what it's at, $6.99, $7.99, or there's kind of all-you-can-eat models, which drive it down even further. So this was all happening while at the same time production values were going up, which made publishers increasingly conservative, meaning that they really only wanted to invest in 3 or 4 different mechanics, which made the space a heck of a lot less fun to be in. And so when around this time, Facebook announced that they were going to open up their API. And that was in late 2007, and we pretty much immediately started to turn the ship in that direction. We were excited by the creative possibilities afforded by access to the social graph. We were excited that we would be able to finally start experimenting with the free-to-play virtual goods model. And we had been watching the free-to-play markets in Asia for years leading up to this. And we understood, at least intellectually, we understood that this was going to be a big pivot for us. The downloadable space was essentially packaged goods, and we were moving into a service model. We knew that running games as a service is completely different from making games, handing them off to your publisher, and then moving on to the next game. We also knew that we need to build some new technology. We need to start paying much closer attention to all of this player data that we now have access to, and that we need to start thinking about game economies and community management and customer support. So despite going in with our eyes open to all these new things and the fact that it was going to be a big transition for us, we still completely underestimated the difficulty of the transition. I think it took us the better part of 18 months to really complete that transition and get comfortable working in this new space. So now we've been making games of this type for about 4.5 years, and we've learned a ton of new stuff during that time. One of the things we learned is that building your own tools is extremely expensive. Building and maintaining your own tools is extremely expensive. So we've all the tools we needed to run games as a service, we rolled our own. We really had no choice at the time, because when we started working in that space, there were no other tools. There was no Contagion, there was no, Live Gamer. And so we kind of had to roll our own if we were going to not reinvent the wheel with every new game. We also learned that metrics-informed game design is really just another flavor of user-centered design, which is really what all game design should be. So alongside that, we also learned that it's just not enough to have a designated person on the team who's charged with looking at metrics all the time. You really need to have everyone in the team at least conversant with all the key metrics for their game. So ARPDAU, 2 and 7 day retention, the percentage of players who are paying, various measures of virality and social engagement, and so on. All of those things offer a window into player behavior, and that helps us make better games, and that's everyone's job at the company. We also learned, once again, after somehow forgetting it for a brief period of time, that it's critical to design from the very beginning for the business model that you are going to be working in with that game. So, and that is even more essential in free-to-play than it ever was in the downloadable game space. And when our first generation of Facebook games, somehow we managed to make that mistake again. We also learned that we needed to start thinking like retailers and marketers. And this is not the native space for game developers. We had to learn about designing stores and the psychology of that, about running sales and price points, and all of those things have a significant impact on whether your game will be financially successful, even if it is successful by other measures of engagement. And finally, we learned about arbitrage. And this is the lesson that I kind of want to leave you with today. Arbitrage in this case refers to the difference between the average cost paid to acquire a customer and the average lifetime value of your players. Seems pretty obvious, but it took us a while to kind of get clear on this, so I thought it was worth walking through an example of player acquisition and how one looks at it through this arbitrage lens. So in this example, let's say you have a game about gladiators. We actually do have a game about gladiators that we built for Facebook, so I've gone through this process very recently. And you go to you decide you want to acquire players using Facebook advertising. So you go to the great Facebook ad creation tool. I would encourage everyone to do this, even if you have no money to spend on ads. It's a fantastic way to gauge audience sizes. And you enter in keywords for the ads, for people that will be addressed by those ads, and you select the region. We almost always are targeting North America because that's where most of our revenue comes from. That's where the highest quality players are in terms of just their propensity to spend, not their quality as human beings. And what Facebook will do in that ad tool is tell you how many potential people on Facebook will be addressed by all of the constraints that you've applied. And you don't have to spend any money to get this data. So Facebook will tell you, okay, there's 300,000 players that fit within these constraints, and they will recommend a cost per click that you should bid. Remember, this is an auction system. It's very much like Google AdWords. You're bidding for the attention of those players effectively against all other advertisers who are also trying to target them. So in this case, Facebook would recommend a cost per click of about 78 cents. And usually they're over from what turns out to be the reality, in my experience, by about 15 or 20%. So your actual will be a little bit lower. But let's just, for the sake of this example, let's say it is 78 cents. So that means you would need to spend $78 to get 100 clicks for that ad campaign, right? Now, we see an average bounce rate of around 50%. It goes higher, it goes lower. Obviously, you can optimize it, but 50% is a good number for your projections. And that means that 50% of those 100 people will go away as soon as they hit the install page. So I know it's baffling to me too. I don't understand why they clicked on that ad to go to a game and then they were like, oh, this is a game? Forget this. But anyway, 50% will go away. So that means we've now spent $78 to get 50 clicks. So, and I'm just assuming that all of those people kind of get through your funnel, your tutorial, get through your new user experience, and they kind of become real engaged players of your game. Because each of the steps in your tutorial offers another opportunity for a bounce. So we're on Facebook, right? So the great promise of Facebook is that all these people can easily bring all of their friends into your game. And back in the day, there was a lot more truth to that promise. With the current state of the Facebook platform, I think you can reasonably expect that virality would add 10 to 50% to those numbers. 50% would be an extremely viral game. But for the sake of this example, let's split the difference and call it 30%, which means that now we've brought that 50 clicks, 50 installs back up to 65. So now we look at the percentage of paying players. Now, that percentage is in the single digits, the low single digits, maybe 0.5% up to 5%. And we'll just assume that we've struck gold and we're getting 5% of players to pay. That means that of those 65 players that we're getting around 3.25 to pay money in our game. 3.25 people. We spent $78 to acquire them. So we need to make an average of $26 from each of those players in order to break even on that $78 campaign. So that is the kind of arbitrage exercise that we should all be going through. And what it does is makes it very clear the value of players spreading the game to their friends. Obviously, that is the cheapest way for you to reduce that cost. It also makes it clear the value of a license potentially, because if there's something that people recognize and a unique keyword that only you have the right to advertise against a particular group for, those things can drive down the cost of acquisition. And now we can put a very specific value on players who don't spend any money in the game and perhaps never will spend money in the game, but they're very active in bringing other players in, right? So they're very social, and they kind of make up for the fact that they're not spending any money. So the other thing it does is make very clear the importance of finding other ways, namely advertising, to get something out of the 95% of players who are never going to spend money in your game. So at Large Animal, we've in the last year, we've started thinking much more clearly about this in this way, thinking much more holistically about kind of both sides of that arbitrage equation. Acquisition on the one hand and monetization on the other. And hopefully all of you are doing that or will be doing that soon. So just to wrap up, and I'm looking forward to questions. So now Large Animal is at 38 people and growing. We have a platform licensing business alongside our game development efforts that really came out of all the things we learned about technology licensing over the years. We're in the process of turning the ship yet again and applying everything we've learned about social and free-to-play to mobile and tablet platforms. We've learned a ton about making money over the last 12 years. Many of those lessons were learned in the hardest way possible by failing to make money. I think we're a lot more sophisticated in our thinking, but we're still learning every single day and every time we bring a new game to market. We certainly have much more advanced kind of metrics tools and financial modeling tools that we use on a regular basis. But I think we've also learned that all of those things are worthless without the basics, which are a passion for learning new things and for that learning in and of itself, and having a fun game. So thanks a lot, and I would love to take questions. I would really love to take questions.
Would you go back to work for hire under any circumstances?
Oh, there's some circumstance in which I would.
Realistic ones.
I don't think so. No, it's a pretty painful existence. And I think if you're not trying to kind of make a name for yourself and you're not trying to figure things out on someone else's dime, it's much better to figure out some way of getting an original game in the world that you can then do lots of different things with. Back in the back.
Is there a way to get people to have their friends without the large risk of getting players to bounce because of the ads to their friends and stuff?
So is there a way to get people to add their friends?
To the game while avoiding the risk of the player bouncing because their friends laugh back at the amount of spam or whatever?
Well, one thing I should say is that players who are brought in through a social mechanic of some sort, like if players who respond to a wall post from their friends saying, I just got an achievement or whatever, if they enter the game that way, their bounce rate will be much lower than someone just who clicked on an ad. But there are lots of ways to encourage people to invite their friends or require them to invite their friends. Obviously, I'm sure we've all played the most popular social games and seen those pain points that are built in, like a staffing mechanic to complete a building or whatever. I think those things all have their place, but I feel like the game industry and the social game industry is kind of evolving away from those, and we're ready for the next generation mechanics. And at the end of the day, none of those things will substitute for having a great game that is actually engaging. And the most powerful form of viral spread is people just wanting to bring their friends into an experience that they're having a great time with. So you can apply every best practice for virality in a social game, and if you don't have a compelling game, it doesn't mean anything.
So where do you think it is going to evolve to? You said it will.
Well, I think it's going to be different for each game, but at the end of the day, it's about games. It's about having the core mechanic be fundamentally social and just being more fun if your friends are there with you.
So you see, what I kind of meant was, you've been through different ways to monetize.
Oh, what do I?
And is this? And I think you were just saying the Facebook viral thing is probably about its natural conclusion, and am I reading something that you didn't say? And so what you thought would be next?
I was talking about so there's what would be next in terms of good viral practices or social practices.
Next place to move your company, in the game space, because you've moved it as times have changed, right? Facebook to mobile. What do you see is on the horizon?
Well, we're at the beginning of maybe midpoint of our transition to mobile, and so we think that, I know that's a very competitive space, but we think that there's a lot of opportunity there still, and that we have a lot to offer because of our experience on Facebook and with the free-to-play model over these past 4.5 years. So to some extent, that's the answer to your question, is I think mobile and tablet, and particularly tablet, are going to be the dominant game platforms, become the dominant game platforms over the next couple of years. It certainly has for me as a gamer. Do I have time for one more?
No.
No? Okay. Well, I'm happy to talk to anyone.